Back in August, voters in Kansas decisively defeated a constitutional amendment that would have weakened abortion rights. It helped to set the stage in part for the party's big wins nationwide in last week's midterms. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas, who won re-election herself. Congresswoman, great to have you on this morning. Congratulations on your win again here. I noticed in 2018 you flipped your seat, which had been a Republican seat, to the Democratic side. You win in 2020, and then this time in 2022 you win by an even wider margin than you won in 2020. So walk us through, if you could, what's going on in your district and in the state of Kansas.
Well, it's good to be here, and I like the timeline we're talking about here. I think that there's a lot going on in Kansas, and certainly in the Kansas third. I think that it's really important to recognize that what we saw both in August and again in November on election night was that people recognized that our rights were on the ballot in August and again in November, and that also, it's important to recognize that people want a representative who's going to show up to do the work, who's going to show up to listen, to best represent the district. And that's what I've been able to do over my time serving the Kansas third.
And Congresswoman, there's been a lot of focus put, as I mentioned at the top, on that ballot initiative over the summer on abortion in the state of Kansas, which I think people look at presidential elections and they go, well, Kansas is a red state. Donald Trump won by 15 points in 2020. And I think that's perhaps why nationally, at least, there was some surprise at that number. How big of a motivating factor do you think that was to voters in your election?
Well, again, I do think that people were, if you think back to June when Roe was overturned, the impact of that was immediate. I mean, people felt it viscerally. I mean, the fear, the anxiety. In Kansas, we were watching neighboring states enact very extreme laws, and we knew that we didn't want politicians making very private health care decisions for us, particularly around abortion or reproductive rights. And so I think that we were getting organized already, and certainly that continued through after the August, after we were able to push back on these extreme policies. And I think that people are absolutely concerned about their rights, but they're also concerned about making sure that their kids and grandkids have opportunities, which is why it was so important for us to make sure that, I am always out there listening and talking about and working on concrete solutions to the issues that are most pressing.
Congresswoman, Sam Stein here. When you talk to people who worked on the Kansas initiative, the ballot initiative, one of the things that they said is an echo of what you just said, which is they had to show up in the communities to talk to people face to face, to explain sort of the stakes of what was going on, in addition to the sort of tricky to understand language of the initiative. You look at people like John Fetterman. He showed up in his red areas of the state and helped, buffer those usual bad margins for Democrats in the rural areas. So I'm wondering, as you take stock of what happened and you look forward for your party, do you think Democrats do a good job showing up to traditionally Republican, conservative, or rural areas? What would you like to see the party do differently? And going forward, what would the message be for party leaders about investments in those communities?
Well, look, I'm always going to encourage investment in Kansas and in the Kansas third. So I do think that that's an important thing to be thinking about. But when it comes to what other folks in other states or districts should be doing, I can't speak to that, but I can say that I show up in every part of the district. You mentioned that with some other folks, Senator-elect Fetterman, certainly, but I think it's really important for anybody who is on the ballot, Democrat, Republican, Independent. If you want to represent people, you have to actually listen to people and show up. I show up in every single part of the district. am always there to listen. I think people appreciate when you show up and you don't already assume that you know everything about what they're dealing with. I also make sure that I show up, listen, and then deliver when I get the chance out here, whether it's, in the upcoming Farm Bill, which I'm very much looking forward to working on, or on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that we got to work on. People want you to listen and deliver, and that's what I've been able to do for the Kansas 3rd.
Congresswoman Ashley Parker of the Washington Post is here with a question for you. Ashley?
Hi, thank you, Congresswoman. I wanted to actually follow up on something Willie asked you. Obviously, abortion was a big issue in your most recent race and in the recent races of a lot of Democrats. I'm curious, do you think abortion has the potential, and those rights being taken away, to become for Democrats what it was for Republicans, for a number of decades, at least until maybe Congress codifies Roe? I guess my question is, was it just a big issue because the Dobbs decision had come down, or can this be galvanizing for generations to come?
Wow, that's maybe something that's best left to political scientists and that sort of thing. I can tell you that I think that protecting our rights and knowing that, I think the Kansas 3rd wanted a representative who is always going to push back against not just extreme policies, but against any attempts to have politicians making these very personal, private decisions, particularly around access to abortion. And I think that so long as you have politicians out there who are either running for office or already elected, who are trying to take away rights that we consider to be foundational, I think that these issues will continue to be important on every single ballot and every single election. And my hope is that folks who are currently representing districts or are seeking to in the future recognize that people do not want their kids to have less rights than they have. And I think that is something that has been very clear from this election cycle, I think.
Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas, who won by 12 points last week in a district that just 4 years ago was red. Thanks so much for your time today, Congresswoman. We appreciate it.
Thank you.